it yesterday in his reps.
Excellent. You're watching National Streaming Sports. Over 20 podcasts, 70 shows, and a 3.5-star rating on Roku TV. Check out nessp.info for direct links and deals on the site BetUs for 125% off your first 3 deposits in NFL and college odds for upcoming games, Major League Baseball and NBA futures, and boxing wagers. Also, check out Fanatics, sportswear for your favorite teams, and also network merchandise, retro, Northeast Streaming Sports, National Streaming Sports, Big Football, and the Mac and Jack Sports Show t-shirts. Coffee mugs are coming soon. Check it out. Yes, sir. Remember then, folks. We're here on your memory show here every Saturday at 8 a.m. I'm your host, Mac, with your co-host, James J. Train. There you go, J. Train. Nola Best. I don't know what the heck all those letters are after James's name now. And the legendary boxing expert himself, Jack Hurst. So this morning, guys, as I said, we do this every Saturday to kind of bring a little bit of information, a little fun on your Saturday morning. And we got a lot to talk about today. And we're going to start off, I didn't get to it last week, but this guy here, John Madden. And so get ready to get on the Madden train. For those of you who know John Madden is, you might not know the whole story. So we're going to divide the bus into groups, okay? We're going to put the guys that are like 50 to 60 years old in the back of the bus when they remember him walking around the sideline like a crazy guy. What the interesting thing about John Madden as a coach, besides all the accolades we're going to talk about, was he wasn't your typical coach. He had long hair. He wore a black shirt, black pants. Once in a while, he throw a white shirt on. He didn't have the suit and tie. He didn't have the hair slicked back, cut short. He walked around the sidelines like a crazy man. And his team consisted of throwaways. Some players didn't make it on the teams. They were uncoachable. John Madden found a way to do that. So we're going to talk about that time during his life. Then we're going to talk about him as an award-winning, 16 award-winning tributes to him as a broadcaster, as he was during the 80s when the NFL became the pastime of the sports world, the head of baseball. And then we'll also, of course, talk about him as Madden and his video show. Jack will hit you with this guy here, Vito Antuofermo. Not only was Jack a boxing with Vito as he was training with him and working with him, and as one of his what would you call it at that time, Jack? Is that like a training partner?
Yeah, sparring partner. He was a level above all of us. So you could say we were sparring partners.
Yeah, Jack held his own. He ran around the ring. We'll talk about that for a little bit. And then, of course, James will hit you with the Baltimore Orioles, early 70s. Maybe talk a little bit about Jim Palmer. So let me get this show on the road. So, John Madden, if you watched him, and a lot of people didn't know what a great coach this guy was, all right? He played football, of course, in college at a small university. See if I can get this. Cal Poly in St. Louis, playing offense and defense for the Mustangs, 57-58, while earning a bachelor degree in science in 59 and a Master of Arts in Education, focused on weightlifting to increase strides and speed and athletic timing. So for all you guys out there saying, oh, this guy just goes boom and whap and he's called. No, this guy was a brilliant guy. He also had a degree in law. This guy was one of the smartest men you'll ever meet. But he was smart. He was smart like a fox. He knew if he talked regular to people that it would be easier for them to follow him, right? So he gets a coaching job. He was drafted by the Eagles. He got a second knee injury during training camp. So he couldn't play anymore. He had a broken collarbone. He had a broken, dislocated knee, and he was an All-American tackle at the time. So he goes and he becomes a coach at San Diego State under none other than Air Coryell. So this is where he got his passing techniques for. He was a middle linebacker, an offensive tackle. He was well versed and all this. So Air Coryell gets him on his team. He ends up coaching, going to become head coach of this Poly Whoopie Dappy school. And the first year, he's 12-1. He wins the division in his first year, guys. And as I said, goes on to coach under Air Coryell. The Raiders' Al Davis hires him as a linebacker coach. And at that time, the Raiders were a pretty good team. They weren't a bad team. But after that Davis hired him, the first season, guy's up there, he's winning the division. This is how fast this guy operated. I mean, he took the Raiders over a 10-year run where they won the division 8 years out of 10 years. He went to 8 championships, got to 1 Super Bowl and won it against the Washington Redskins, where Marcus Allen had that real big game. And as I said, he took all these players that a lot of people didn't want, uncoachable. He would sit there. If you look at video clips of John Madden, which I did, he would sit in practice and smile while they were fighting each other, like brawling on the field. He just sit there and smile. And he had a way of bringing all these guys, the Lalo Zados, the Stork. I'm trying to remember his name, Jack. The Stork who took Joe Namath.
Hendricks.
Thank you, Hendricks. He had that big guy that was in the middle, and he had the hitman on the defensive backfield. These guys were wild men, and he got them together as a team. And as the NFL film said, they were, what is Autumn? It's like a Raider, and they focused on the Raiders. They come in pillaging and taking things, and it was just he was magic as a coach there. And as I said, he was very, very unorthodox. Tom Landry had the cut hair, and Don Shula looked very presentable. And there he is standing next to Tom Landry with his hat all dapper, and here's John Madden in sneakers and his black pants with a belt and a black shirt. So that was the winning John Madden. And John Madden, over 100 games, regular season, has the highest winning percentage, 750, higher than Vince Lombardi's regular season record. So in 100 games, he has the highest percentage as a coach. This is how good a coach he was, folks. So then he goes to broadcasting. And I remember first seeing this guy broadcast, and I remember how he looked. And that big face hit that camera, and I was like, holy God. Again, totally different than any of the broadcasts you've ever seen. They were all clean cut. John Madden had his hair, long hair. And he looked good. I mean, it's not like he just, he did comb it. But that big face hit there, and he didn't look like a normal color commentator. He didn't look like the other ones out there. But, man, he had a way of bringing them plays to life. When you watched him, even the novice fans, James, even the novice fans back then who didn't know that much about football, they just watched where the ball went. John Madden brought their attention to the pulling guards, to the Nate Newtons, to the Redskins hogs. This is the reverse tray where the guards and tackles are switching. He had that telestrator, and he had the lines going. He put the X there, and everybody got involved. They knew who Nate Newton was. They knew who the hogs were. They knew who Jackie Slater was, tackles and guards. And he put the emphasis on the blocking fullbacks. Moose Man from Dallas Cowboys and Maurice Carthon, and he got you excited about it. He wasn't just talking about the running backs and the quarterbacks. He was talking about the line, the linebackers, Harry Carson, the LTs wrecking the game. He also said about Reggie White, you better put enough money in the collection plate, because if you don't, he's going to sack you. I mean, he made fun of everything. He had the boom and the whap and the pow, like from the Batman cartoons. When he hit somebody, you got the pow. He brought that to life, made the game exciting, and won 16 awards, Grammy Awards. He broadcasted on every major network there was: CBS, NBC, Monday Night Football, and he took this with him. And as I said, football during this time, during the 80s, grew. Did he have a part in that? I think he did. I think people tuned in to watch Pat Summerall and John Madden. And they watched John Madden as he moved to another and watched John Madden again. He was one of a kind. And I think if you look at football, just football, you could say he's one of the most influential people in football in history. I mean, of course, you had the GMs and the heads of the president of National Football League and all, but this man was out there in front, and NFL picked up millions of new fans. And I think you could give John Madden a lot of credit for that. So what does he do after that? Well, he kind of steps away, and then you have, excuse me, you have the Madden football game. It comes out. Kids in the front of the bus, right? They're all playing Madden. They have no idea what kind of coach this guy was. But all the kids play it, and they play it today. He's passed away, and they still use his voice for the whaps and the bams and the pows. And in fact, I think they're doing an anniversary of him coaching the Raiders that one great season when they went to the Super Bowl. They're using some of them cuts, and they're doing a special anniversary issue of John Madden. I don't know what you guys think about John Madden. I imagine it's close to what I'm talking about. And I think, Jack, we talk about the Madden bus, right? The Madden bus, he wouldn't fly. He would stop in towns and talk to people. Talking to people.
I share your high opinion of John Madden, everything he said, except he wasn't a great coach. I'm not going to get carried away. If you want to call him a great coach, I'll compare him to Mike McCarthy the last 3 seasons before the season with the Cowboys. They were 12-5 every season. Arguably, I'm not sure whether that's the best regular season record over a 3-year span. But no one's saying Mike McCarthy, he's one of the top 2-3 coaches in the NFL. Mike McCarthy won one Super Bowl, as did John Madden. John Madden was a good coach, okay? I'm going to give him his due, but I'm not going to compare him to the all-time great coaches because he wasn't quite there. He was just a very good, the good to very good coach. And let's stop it there. What happened with John Madden, his teams often couldn't get over the top because they had other great teams standing in their way. Case in point, when the Miami Dolphins won the Super Bowl 2 years in a row, they had the unbeaten season, and then the Dolphins had an even better team the next year, even though they lost 2 games. The team that repeated was a better team that won the Super Bowl. The Raiders beat the Dolphins in the playoffs on Kenny Stabler's miraculous pass when he was falling down. And a lot of people felt that Dolphin-Raider game, the emotions were so high, they felt that was like the championship game right there to see who would go to the Super Bowl. The only problem was it wasn't. They had to play the next week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who hadn't yet won a Super Bowl. The Steelers had been around. They'd been contending. No one knew how good the Steelers were. No one knew the Steelers were about to win 4 Super Bowls, but there they were. The Raiders went against the legendary Steeler team in Oakland, but the Raiders had a massive letdown because beating the Dolphins was their championship game. They couldn't get up the next week, and they got upset by the Steelers, and the Steelers went on to win the Super Bowl. Then the Steelers won the Super Bowl the next year, beating Madden's Raiders again in the AFC Championship game. Fairly close game, 16-10, I think the score was. And then the Raiders finally got over the top. They won a Super Bowl with Madden. And that was basically it for Madden's coaching career. Good coaching career, very good coaching career. You can't deny his winning percentage, you can't take away from that. And I think what made Madden so appealing was his personality more than anything else. He was an everyday guy. He was the type of guy who, if he came on this show right now with us, he'd blend right in. We'd get along great with him off the bat like that. He would just blend, hey, how you doing, guys? And we would transition in a matter of seconds with John Madden. That's why they loved him. Like you mentioned, the Madden Mobile, because he was scared to fly. He'd stop off at every town, and he'd hang out at the diner, laughing, joking with people. And it wasn't an act. He really enjoyed meeting the people, and it was reflective when you watched him as an analyst on TV. He not only gave you the X's and O's and gave you the inside information the way guys do today, but his personality was coming through. You got the feeling you were sitting next to him while he was on the air, like, enjoying the game with him. He was, that type of personality. And by all accounts, he was a very good person too, who wouldn't, want his players to take cheap shots. But that was a little odd. This is what I can't figure out, guys. The Oakland Raiders were considered to be the ultimate villains, but Madden was their coach. And he wouldn't tolerate any cheap shots. I even remember, one of the people who he cut from the Raiders, this is great trivia, was Carl Weathers, who later be Apollo Creed and Rocky.
Yeah.
And Carl Weathers was once asked about playing football, whether he took a cheap shot at someone. Supposedly he injured one of the players. And he said, no, Coach Madden made it clear to us, you never, do this or that. That, you never take these cheap shots at another player. And just an all-around good guy, John Madden. That's to me, I don't know what you consider his legacy to be. Coaching, broadcaster, this, that. When I think of John Madden, I just think of the ultimate compliment. He was a good guy. Good guy. But you mentioned his effect afterwards with the Madden, what is it called? I don't play these games.
Madden football.
Famous, the Madden 360 or whatever you call the games he plays. I mean, what a legacy this guy has. I mean, it's well earned. It couldn't happen to, reportedly a nicer guy than him.
So James,
I can add to that. Yeah, go ahead.
James, let me add to this now, because Jack is kind of saying, well, maybe he wasn't a great coach. He played, as Jack said, there were a lot of great teams in the AFL. They dominated AFC. They dominated. So to beat the Steelers, to beat the Dolphins was a heck of a compliment itself. And I'm not comparing to Vince Lombardi or even to Tom Landry, Don Shula. I'm saying his winning percentage is better than them during the regular season. Now you can. Well, all I'm saying, Jack, is that's just a fact.
I'm going to give you a great comparison.
Was he better? Is he? Well, wait. Let me finish. Is he better? Maybe not. If he coached maybe another 10 years, would he have been? I don't know. It's just he called it quits after that. Maybe he was ineffective that last year or whatever it was, but he turned to broadcasting. So he went out on top. I'm not saying that he's better than Bill Belichick.
I'll give a comparison that James could relate to in this modern era. Let's say hypothetically the 49ers win one Super Bowl now with Kyle Shanahan, and that's it. No more after that. Unless Kyle Shanahan has a very long career after that in his share winning seasons, no one's going to call Kyle Shanahan one of the great all-time coaches. They'll say, hey, he was a heck of a good coach. He finally got his team over the top.
It's a great point.
Best comparison.
That's a great point, Jack. Great point.
I'd put those two along with him. I'd put those two along with Sean Payton in the same realm.
Nah.
I'm saying Sean Payton was a good coach. New Orleans. Well, I don't want to. This is not a New Orleans segment. I'm just saying what he did for the team. But I wanted to add about the video game thing. I wanted to say.
Get there. I don't want to get there yet. I want to talk a little bit about him broadcasting.
Sure. So, go ahead.
He ends up on all the Thanksgiving shows, and they had a little award for they ate a turkey leg, or it was a turkey, then it was a Dunkin', and then it was another. He had like 3 different birds in here, and Nate Newton again. He has the big offensive lineman out there, and this is what I love. If you know anything about coaching, yeah, the running back and quarterbacks are important, but them offensive linemen and those defensive players, they really are the foot soldiers. These guys don't get all the credit, right? Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin, who's Nate Newton, and he brought attention to the foot soldiers. Those guys that nobody talked about, made them famous, and they still give out the Turkey Awards in honor of John Madden today. There was also an all John Madden team. Now I know Jack knows this, where they would take certain players and put them on John Madden's team. He would select them. These certain players that he thought were football players that had got mud on their jerseys, got dirt on their jerseys, got blood coming out of their nose, grass in the ear hole. These were the John Madden players that he would name to the team. So if you're a tough quarterback like a Brett Favre, this is how we describe this team. He got a lot of accolades from John Madden because the guy was playing like a linebacker as a quarterback. So this is how big he was. You add all Madden's team. It was unbelievable. So anyway, go ahead with the because I don't play Madden NFL or Madden that either, but you could tell us a little bit about it.
So I will tell you just a side note. That's a turducken. That's a turkey, chicken, and duck mixed together. Coming from Louisiana is the only reason why I know that. It's a weird bird, but it's good. It's really good. My introduction to John Madden wasn't with football. It was with video games. I was young. That video game era was a big thing. Nintendo, and then on to Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, those types of games. And Madden was a big deal. It was a great big deal. I mean, to hear as a kid, to hear this guy, his little shout outs, they put his voice on there. They didn't have that. He would say, boom, he's on his back. Or he'd say, that's the way to hit him. Or he'll remember that number, that type of thing. It was a great thing. And to me, with him, John Madden with the video game to football was like what Michael Jordan's shoe did for NBA basketball. It was highly impactful because a lot of kids who didn't watch football, they played video games, and you played that game because it was just fun. It wasn't, even if you didn't like the X's and O's of the game, he would always commentate and say a lot of different things, and you would play the game just to hear him talk. Yeah. And so it was a great thing. I really enjoyed it, and I still enjoy it to this day. I have a PlayStation 4, and I play Madden still to this day, and it's awesome. It's evolved greatly, and it's just a great thing. Wow.
I'm going to say this, sport for sport, take all the sports, the analysts. I would put John Madden off the top of my head. I'd have to think it over a little more, but off the top of my head, is the greatest sports analyst of all time. I'll give you a case in point. Let's say John Madden was in his prime as an analyst today, and Tom Brady, when he became available, the Fox network blew the competition out of the water with the money offer they made him. No one would have a chance. But any other analyst would have been replaceable by Brady. Chris Collinsworth would have been replaceable. Even Tony Romo would have been replaceable. Greg Olson wound up getting replaced, and he was respected. Had John Madden been at Fox and someone suggested that Tom Brady replace him, the reaction would have been, are you out of your bleeping mind?
Yes.
You know, you want to replace John Madden? Are you crazy? You know, it would have been so ludicrous that I don't think anyone would have even suggested it or brainstormed it at all, or would have said, oh, maybe we can move Brady as a third person and Madden could mentor him. Maybe they've discussed maybe a 3-person booth, and Madden would have complete say over that. If Madden wasn't going to feel comfortable with it in the slightest, the idea would have gotten squashed. That's the power he commanded, the respect he commanded.
That's unbelievable point, Jack. And with John Madden, it seemed like, again, as Jack said, you could be sitting there watching a game, and you could understand the game better, right? You could be sitting there in a booth with John Madden, and he talked. I mean, the guy seemed like he would talk to you. We talked about the turkey and the Durkin and the whatever. Do you know he took this small place and he quadrupled the volume? And it was just a guy. He stopped by at this place that made these Durkins, and he made this place make thousands and thousands of Durkins because his influence. And he did this for a small place. He didn't go to a big manufacturer. He went to a guy in a restaurant that could do this stuff and made his sales go through the roof. The kind of power Madden had. But
watching the games, James, just watching the games when he was in the broadcast booth, he made them so enjoyable. And this is something to note. All these analysts have their critics. You know, we read about them where they're criticized for saying this, for saying that. I don't remember anyone ever criticizing John Madden because it would be a losing proposition. They would look bad if they nitpicked on John Madden's analysis. They'd look really bad. Yeah. So, he was like foul-proof, untouchable because, they realized how good he was. And anyone reading about them criticizing John Madden, it wasn't going to go over well.
Yes. And before we get to boxing, also an author, his biggest seller, 1 knee equals 2 feet, which they use today. He got a knee down, that equals 2 feet. It's still said today. Jack's got a personal friend who also happened to be the middleweight champion of the world at one time, sparred with him. Let's talk a little bit about Vito Antuofermo.
Yeah. When we were kids, I mean, this was like late 1969. Vito Antuofermo comes into the Sweeney Center Police Athletic League in Brooklyn, New York. I had been there a couple of months. I was an aspiring amateur boxer. And I'm hanging out with the coach, Joe LaGuardia, a former good pro who was a stablemate of Tony Canzoneri, a great champion out of the past. And the police officer brings this stocky little Italian kid into the gym. He'd been fighting in the street. Now imagine that. When do officers in this day and age bring a kid into a boxing gym because he was fighting in the street? And he told the kid he had a choice. Either go to get arrested, he's going to take him to the precinct, learn how to fight for real, in a boxing gym. And the kid decided he'll go to the boxing gym. I'm standing there. He's brought in by the police officer, and he's right next to me. And I'm just like looking at him, hearing the police officers say, no, we're bringing him in. The reason why, that he's going to learn to box. And I'm just eyeing him, just like looking right at him the whole time. This was like something out of a movie. If you freeze that moment, I've said this before, the police officer later would turn out to be a well-known boxing judge, Joe Dwyer himself. Okay, so he became a well-known boxing judge. I, got a little recognition. I wound up being president of the Boxing Writers Association of America. And who would have thought that kid Gordon would turn out to be the world middleweight champion? So you freeze these moments, it's like unbelievable that scenario could actually take place, but it did take place. And Vito immediately caught on. He didn't have the greatest amount, I wouldn't say of talent per se, but he had tremendous drive, tremendous stamina. He could fight nonstop. His defense was better than people thought it was. And he won the Golden Glove Championship, 147 pounds sub-novice championship his first year. And myself and the other guys at the gym, we basically transitioned into sparring partners of his. It was like Vito was the executive of the gym. Like he was the head guy, and we turned out to be like interns as it was happening. And he loves to tell a story, even he tells it today. He likes when I tell it, but our coach Joe LaGuardia would bring us to the center of the ring to spar, and he'd turn to me and say, Jack, jab, and run. And then he'd turn to Vito and go, Vito, go easy. Vito loves that story, even to be repeated today. And so Vito wins the Golden Glove title, 1970, 147-pound sub-novice title. He loses in the finals the next year to Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, who later became a world champion in the professional ranks. Vito loses, a close but fair decision to Mustafa Muhammad the next year. And talk about coincidences, how fate would have it. Another crazy coincidence happened. You know how crowded New York City is, okay? Vito turns professional. He's in another gym. I hadn't seen him a while. It's the day of his first fight, and they had to weigh in early in the day. At those times, they held a weigh in the day of the fight. He just happens to get on the train from Manhattan going back to Brooklyn that I'm on. And I meet up to him the day he's making his pro debut. I didn't wind up going to that fight. Even that was at Sunnyside Gardens, even though I went to a lot of Vito's fights after that, because we'd been out of touch a little while then. But of course, Vito came up the ranks. He had problems with cuts. He lost a couple of fights on the way up because he cut, in part, one especially against Harold Weston, where he was winning points and was strictly due to a cut. And then he gets a shot at the World Middleweight Championship. After beating fighters like Emil Griffith and Benny Briscoe, he gets a shot at the fighter Hugo Coro, who was a beatable middleweight champion, and Vito beat him in Italy. Now he's the world middleweight champion in his first defense in November 1979 against Marvin Hagler. Imagine that. Hagler had been waiting a long time for his shot at the middleweight title, and even the politicians in Massachusetts got involved in Hagler's behalf. Some very heavy hitters, because Hagler was heavily avoided, first and foremost because he was just flat out good, and no champion wanted to risk a fight against Hagler. And Vito fights the fight of his life, and the fight ends in a draw. Wow. The majority of people gave Hagler an edge. Some think Vito won. Some think the draw was fair. I would later get the punch totals from CompuBox. And according to CompuBox, it was a close fight. You know, that Hagler landed something like 23 more punches for the whole fight, but Vito landed more power punches than Hagler, according to the stats. So according to the stats, it was a close fight. But bottom line is, Vito retained his title on a 15-round draw, because the champion can't lose his title on a draw. And ironically, that was the semifinal that night on ABC. Sugar Ray Leonard won his first title against Wilfred Benitez right after that. And then Vito's next fight against the Britisher Alan Minter. Okay? And close fight, could have gone either way. I had scored a draw personally, and I could always score Vito's fights fairly. You know, I wasn't a homer when it came to that. I had a draw. A lot of people feel Vito won the fight, but Minter gets a split decision. It was highly unfair. Not one of the judges that scored for Minter by a couple of points. They had a British judge, Roland Dakin, okay, who ironically was one of the judges who scored it for Vito when he won the world title. But listen to this. It's a 15-round fight. Reportedly, Dakin was hanging out with Minter's people. Reportedly, but there's no direct evidence of that. But in a close fight that could have gone either way, Dakin gives Vito only one of the 15 rounds. Yeah. And in that round, Vito knocked Minter down.
Yes, I remember that.
Dakin couldn't have given it to Minter. Even if he wanted to, it would have been, beyond the scandal had he done that.
Yes.
And that's, so Vito never had a chance. He never had 3 judges. He had 1 judge for all intents and purposes. I don't want to, Wade wasn't going to get the decision with that judge. I mean, it was crazy to score 13 rounds, Minter, 1 round Vito, the run, he knocked him down 1 even. Vito was never quite the same after that, losing the title. He was a very physical fighter. His performances were slipping, even though he trained hard. He got stopped by Minter in a rematch on cuts, but was never really in that fight. And then he had a rematch with Hagler, eventually got stopped on cuts in the 4th round. A jab knocked him down earlier, but he was actually getting into the fight in the 4th round. And if he wasn't cut, you get the feeling it would have been a distance fight with Hagler winning, the rematch. He just wasn't the same after that.
Yeah.
He had his absolute highs. His best fighting was on the way up. And then in the Hagler draw, and maybe in the fight he lost against Minter, he fought well, in that disputed decision. And then afterwards, Vito would have, a few odd jobs here, and then he opened up a pizza parlor, this or that. But he did okay because he got a union job.
Yes.
Something he was working on the docks for a while, No, he wasn't a collector like you see in the none of that stuff, He had, and he did okay. And now Vito is around a lot of boxing functions in New York. I saw him a couple of weeks ago at the New York State Boxing Hall of Fame banquet. I was busy running the banquet, but he came over to me. We hung out a few minutes. We talked on stuff. And he's seen a lot around New York at these functions, and everyone loves Vito.
Yeah.
It's always like a big, big hit. He's always, he's always been highly charismatic, Vito. I mean, a tremendous amount of charisma, and like I said, everyone loves Vito.
Jack, I watched, that was one of the first, or maybe the first real middleweight fight I watched. I watched that year, of course, I watched the Frazier fights a lot, but when I went to middleweight, it was because of, I don't know, I had the TV on and I watched Vito, and I knew Marvin Hagler was good. I heard about Marvin Hagler, and I watched this guy keep coming in and keep coming in and keep coming in, and I just liked him. I liked the way he just didn't stop. He was like, he was like a train. And Hagler would tag him and move, and then Vito would come inside and give him a couple 1-2s. And Hagler, they went back and forth. It was a tremendous fight. I remember watching that, and I kind of liked Vito. I liked Hagler, but I liked Vito. I was interested. So
Mac, standing toe to toe with the great Marvin Hagler for 15 rounds and exchanging punches for all 15 rounds. And the final bell rings, and Hagler never came close to knocking Vito out. I mean, whether he hurt him or whether he dazed him for a moment, you know, Vito later told me Hagler was a hard puncher. You know, you want to hear a funny story after that. Oh, I got to tell you this, that Vito was telling me when we were driving together in the car to a function one time. And and Vito had little parts in movies like Goodfellas, The Godfather, and they were shooting the movie The Godfather in Italy. And Hagler was living in Italy at the time. This is after they both retired. And Hagler was an actor. And Hagler was hanging around the set, you know, The Godfather. And the producers would say to Vito, well, what are we supposed to do with Marvin? They didn't have a part with him. Vito goes, I don't know. I mean, but later that night, Hagler picked Vito up and they went to a club together to just hang out. Imagine that. Hagler picks Vito up and they're hanging out at the club. And Vito's thinking, you know, I really like this guy. You know, if I lived in Italy full time, I'd actually be his friend. It was like a social occasion. And he said, no, they didn't talk about their fight, what went on. They were just two guys, you know, hanging out and join one another's company.
Could you call Vito the middleweight Chuck Wepner, Jack? I mean,
no, he was better
that's
than
the
only.
No, I'm talking about the bleeding. No, wait. In this sense, he kept getting cut. I mean, if Vito didn't get cut, I think he would have won a couple more fights. I think he beats Minter in the first fight if he's not bleeding. Because
no. First fight went the distance, so I don't think it had a bearing.
I think it gets in your vision, Jack. I think it affects you in some way when you're bleeding. I mean, you know, I thought Vito beat Minter in that first fight too. I really did. I heard about the British judge there giving him 13 of the 15 rounds, which I don't know how.
And the other called even. He gave, I said, he gave Vito the round that he knocked Minter down.
Right. So I mean, I don't even know how that. I don't even know how that plays out. And you know, in judging, because you see it all the time. You see home judges favoring the home fighter, which is totally ridiculous. I think they should all be not.
Listen, I mean, the judge can always say he gave an honest assessment of the fight. That's how he saw it. That's how he scored it. I'm always reluctant to question a judge's honesty. Okay, so I'm going to give the judge the benefit of the doubt that he gave an honest assessment. And with that said, he should have his license. He should have had his license pulled for incompetence. I mean, I don't want to hear every round is subjective. It's a matter of opinion. It's this and that. You know, there's common sense too.
Yes.
I mean, you mean to tell me the 14? He didn't give Vito any of the rounds outside of the round that Vito knocked Minter down. You mean to tell me he didn't give Vito one other round?
Right.
Then I want this judge. Then if this judge wants to make an issue out of it, you know, it's long ago. I don't even know if the judge alive anymore. But if the judge had wanted to make an issue out of it, point to all the other judges, how they scored the fight. Then they're incompetent. They should be, according to this judge. I don't want to hear every round is close, this and that. Yeah. I mean, it's so distasteful.
I think so too, Jack. I do too, and you know that's a great thing about what Jack does. He gets to meet all these different fighters and interview them. But this one's a little special. This is one that goes way back with Jack, and this is why, you know, I tried to get it on our daily show, but there's just not enough time for Jack to really expound on what his relationship with Vito Infierno was from the get-go. From the beginning of, you know, training in a gym. That's awesome, Jack. So, James, we'll put you up forefront here with the Baltimore Orioles of the early 70s, and we'll have another team for you next week because one team just closes doors that we'll talk about next week. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the Baltimore Orioles and a little bit about Jim Palmer. What a great pitcher.
Yeah, Jim Palmer, man. That's one of the greatest pitchers I've seen. Well, I haven't seen anything being 49 years old except highlights. But just watching some of this stuff and reading about this, not just the player, but this team, they were dominant, but they weren't. They had some issues with, like you said, the team we're going to talk about next time. I'll mention it a little bit. They coming off that 69 crushing defeat in the World Series against the Miracle Mets. That was pretty devastating for them. So most teams you would think maybe they can't even bounce back from something like that, because that's not the team. To me, that's kind of like the New York Giants in 2007 beating the Patriots when they were going undefeated. I mean, that's not supposed to happen, but it did happen, of course. And watching or reading about this team, and they had the same players, they had the same pitching, they had the manager was Earl Weaver, and this staff, it was a great staff, man. They had we're talking like a full all-star lineup. You had 3 Golden Glove winners that year in 70. And Brooks Robinson, Davey Johnson, and Paul Blair. And even they had Frank Robinson on that team. And they had power hitting and Boog Powell. And then the pitching, I mean, Mike Cuellar and Dave McNally, and of course, Hall of Famer Jim Palmer. It was just an all-star lineup, man. It was just everybody was there. They were primed to go back in 70 and do it again. And they would end up even with an injury early on to Paul Blair, who was out for like 3 weeks. They were just dominant. Got 108 wins. The team that they would end up meeting with in the American League Championship Series is ironically the same team that's the only team in the regular season that they had a losing record to. They were 5-7 against the Minnesota Twins. And they end up playing them, but they swept them. There was nothing that they had for them there. They swept them and went on to the World Series. And
1970, I hate to cut in, because I think in 69 they swept the Twins in 3 games. Did they play them again in 70? I
believe so. Yeah.
Okay, I don't remember that.
Okay. They swept them for the 2nd straight year, Jack.
Right. Okay. I forgot who they played in 70 to get there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they swept them in 70 and went on to play another pretty good team in the Cincinnati Reds, man, having people like Johnny Bench. I think he was the NL MVP that year. And also they had Pete Rose. They were managed by a young 36-year-old Sparky Anderson. And the first game was pretty close, but there was a controversial call. I think you guys would know about that, when the catcher tagged the guy out with the glove in one hand and the ball in the other, and they didn't see that. Yeah, and that was I seemed to turn the game into a different way. And the next inning, Brooks Robinson hit a home run, and they just went on from there. And it went on to be a gentleman's sweep. Cincinnati won 1 game, and then they end up winning in 5.
Yeah, I remember Game 4. Let me cut in with Cincinnati from behind. If my memory doesn't fail me, there's a way to check up on this. You got strictly from memory. Lee May, I think, hit a 3-run homer to put the Cincinnati ahead late, and then they won the game, and now it's 3-1. And then Sparky Anderson, who I wasn't fascinated with him blabbing all his talk. He had a great public image. Sparky Anderson says they're down 3-1. Well, if we win tomorrow, then the pressure's on Baltimore. And Howard Cosell said it best: as long as Baltimore's ahead, the pressure's going to be more on Cincinnati. Sparky Anderson was known. If I'm cutting in too much on your thing,
you're fine.
But Sparky Anderson was known for his bluster like this. For example, when they would play the Oakland A's 2 years later, his Cincinnati team, he picked his Reds to win in 7 games, which is smart, because even if you go up 3-0, you could say, oh, they're not out of it. I expect, a tough thing. So then if they win a couple of games, he could say, just as I expected. So they fall down 3-1. And of course, he's saying, no, I said all along we were going to win in 7. Because if he says they win in 6 and there's no possibility of winning in 6 anymore, then he feels panic sets in. So, all his head games and all with Sparky Anderson, I mean, I didn't care for it, and he had his 4 favorites. it's a Baltimore thing, so I'm going to wrap it up after
Yeah, there
that.
you go. We'll talk about the Reds too.
Right. But,
Yes,
but
go
he's
ahead.
talking about Bench, Rose, Morgan, and Perez. Those
Right.
were his 4 favorites. Those are his executive guys. He says the rest of you are basically nerds. These are the guys. He treats them like kings. He gave them all special privileges. And he would really kind of, I don't want to say be mean to the other guys, but clamp down hard on the other guys. Like, that you guys don't got the rights that they have. That was Sparky, Anderson. But he was given such a wonderful, good guy image. Oh, and in the 70 World Series, too. Well, let's get back to that. There was one play with Boog Powell that he looked like he could fall into the Cincinnati Red dugout. And this reflects well on Sparky Anderson. His hand he held out to maybe brace the fall. And he said after the game, I'd rather lose the game than to have someone get injured. And I'm going to take him at his word that he was sincere. And that maybe showed that he did have a good heart, Sparky Anderson, to do what he did. So kudos to him on that.
All right,
Yeah,
Jay.
Boog Powell is 6'4". He's a big guy.
Yeah.
He's a big man.
Yeah.
Yes, he was.
So with that said, they go on to win the World Series and again go back again the next year in 71. But they had a dominant team. I mean, not a dominant team, but they play a very formidable team in Pittsburgh in the World Series, and they lose in 7. And so, I mean, just looking at from 69 through 71, they went. That's pretty respectable to go to 3 World Series, but they were 1 and 2 in that aspect, and they had a down season in 72, but they bounced back in 73, and this is where you see more. Let me go back to 70. I wanted to mention that the pitching was incredible too. They had 3 pitchers that had 20+ games wins in that season. Of course, the 3 I mentioned earlier. I mean, 24 for both McQuellar. Excuse me, for Quell. Is it McQuellar? I can't say his name right.
Yeah. Mike Cuellar.
Mike Quell, yes.
Cuellar,
And David McNally, 24 games each for them and 20 for Jim Palmer.
Dave
But-
McNally, Jim Palmer. They have 420-game winners one
We
year.
added.
At Dobson.
It was
added
4, yeah.
They added him. Yes.
That's
They did add him.
But Jim Palmer would go on to win 3 Cy Youngs. The 70s were his decade. I mean, he seemed to hit his stride. Almost all his awards were in the 70s because he started in 65 and won a World Series. And it might add, this is a guy that he has a side note stat of winning a game in a World Series in 3 different decades. I think he's the only player to ever do that.
It's true.
So I don't know if that's it.
Yeah, that they played in the stadium, Memorial Stadium, and at that time, the fans didn't exactly get behind the team because I know one of the World Series games, there was still some seats available. I remember reading saying not in the best locations, but you could still buy tickets at the game. And I remember in the early 70s, my parents had some friends in Baltimore, and we went to visit to stay at their house. And it was a late season game, and the Orioles were playing. And I asked, could they drive me to the stadium, pick me up? And they did it. I bought a ticket, and I kid you not, I forgot how much I paid for it. But I remember sitting behind home plate, downstairs, behind the screen, and watching Jim Palmer pitching. I mean, to get a seat like that at that time,
Yeah.
and the people. Yeah, but you mentioned the 3 World Series in a row that they went to, like the 1970 World Series. Brooks Robinson dazzled with his glove. Arguably the greatest defensive third baseman of all time, Brooks Robinson. Arguably. So I don't know who you'd rather have at third base. If you had a choice, Pete Rose or Brooks Robinson, people would have picked Pete Rose at that time for his bat because we were more offensive minded then. But when you think of the amount of times that Brooks Robinson, robbed the Reds from hits and stymied their attack, and it drove Sparky Anderson crazy. But then losing in 69 to the Mets, believe it or not, even though that upset the Orioles, they felt they were the better team. they certainly had the better personnel than the Mets. The Mets were on this crazy magical run. I mean, they were that Met team, not on paper. You talk about momentum, was one of the greatest teams of all time. They won this ridiculous run. It was kind of like the Giants against the Patriots. When the Giants beat the unbeaten Patriots, that Giant team would have been a handful for any other team. You don't like what I'm saying, Richard? I mean, okay, I'll turn it over to James.
Well, let me say,
You know who that is? Wait,
That's
you know who that is? Wait a minute, James.
Let
You
me
know who
say
that is? Wait a minute, James. Yeah, that's Rick Sherlock trying to give you a hard time as he always does.
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, he's coming out.
Oh,
Richard
that's
thing.
Rick. Yeah, Sherlock.
So anyway,
Let me
let me throw a couple things at you too, James. All right. When they lost to the Pittsburgh Pirates, that was when Roberto Clemente hit it for 414, right? And I think wasn't Willie Stargell part of that team too during the 70-71 series, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was there.
I
think
remember
it was-
Stargell played the big part in when the Pirates beat the Orioles in 1979, 8 years later.
Right. I think he was a young kid then. I'm not sure, Jack. I'm not 100% sure. That's why I'm asking. But when they lost to Oakland, listen, that went 7 games. And Catfish Hunter is the one that won that game 3-0. And that was it. Let me see, what year was
No,
that?
they didn't have a 7-game
it
series.
was 5 in the
Five game,
PCL.
my bad. The last game.
That was in
3-0.
73. That was in
Right.
73.
Catfish Hunter was that's the reason. Yeah. So I mean, Catfish Hunter, pretty
Well,
good pitcher in his own right. I think he might even been Cy Young that year. I'm
Well,
not 100% sure.
It was
And he also
upsetting.
opened again in 74, 3-1.
Yes.
It was more upsetting to me to see the Orioles lose in 71 to the Pirates and 69 to the Mets, because the Mets were on a magical run, and some people still weren't taking the Mets as seriously. The Orioles felt, okay, it's a nice story, but we're a great team. We've won 108 games. We'll take care of business. We're just better than these guys. And then the Orioles won game 1 of the series, which kind of confirmed it in their own mind. And then they lost 2-1 the second game. And they figure, oh, okay, these things happen. And then they lose the next 3 at Shea Stadium. But in 71, they went up 2-0. They went up 2-0. They win the first 2 games at Baltimore. And then they lose the next 3 at, in Pittsburgh. And then they win game 6. They eke out an extra inning game. And then they lose 2-1 in game 7. It's like they forgot how to hit. But Clemente got the MVP against the Orioles in 71. But if we want to use revisionist thinking, and people don't want to hear about this because Clemente was so revered, Steve Blass really should have been the MVP of that series. He won game 3 and he won game 7. He shut down, the vaunted Oriole attack in game 3 and game 7. So think of that, a starting pitcher who dominates 2 games and turns the series around. How could he not be the MVP?
No, Clemente had a great series though. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, Clemente was a nice pick. The way it looked, but yeah.
To add to what you said, Jack, in regards to Brooks Robinson, you said going him versus Pete Rose because he had the hitting. Robinson had a hit in that World Series 429. So
I didn't realize it.
Yeah, he hit 429. So he actually did pretty good as well.
Which series?
In 1970 against the Reds.
Wow.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know.
why. So he played both. He played great on both ends.
Who was Robinson the series MVP?
Yes, he was a series MVP.
Brooks Robinson. Okay, yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's strange the way they picked it. In 69 when the Mets beat the Orioles, Don Clendenin, because he hit 3 big homers, was a series MVP. But it should have gone to Jerry Koosman, who won 2 games. Okay, when you think of it, at this day and age, the voters think a little differently. They don't think offense quite as much as pitching the way they did, back in the day.
I mean, you go back to and correct me if I'm wrong, Jack. Didn't that one series against the Dodgers Craig Nettles had? He wasn't the MVP, wasn't it? Bucky Dent, if if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you're talking about 78. Yeah, game 3, Nettles made some, phenomenal plays in the field. Yeah, the Yankees won 5-0, but he robbed the Dodgers, twice that game, once a game after that. Sensational plays he made. Yeah. Paul Blair, he was a lucky guy. He got to play with Robinson and Nettles, arguably the 2 greatest defensive third basemen ever. You can make a case, for that.
So as James says, right, Jim Palmer goes on, gets 268 wins, a lifetime ERA of 286. Unbelievable, right?
2,212 strikeouts. Yeah.
Quick trivia for you guys. Palmer was known for what? He did a commercial after that. Remember?
Shoot. Wait a minute. God, I could see.
Now, since this is not in my era, I happened to see a commercial on YouTube with both the Robinsons, and they did a Miller Lite commercial. And so that was actually pretty cool. I mean, but I don't know what he's known for.
Jack,
wait a
minute. Give me just a second. What did he? I mean, I remember the commercial. I don't know what the hell he was endorsing. It was huge. It was out there all the time.
Yeah, it was huge.
Oh my God, I can't remember.
I think I ran across that too.
I see his face. I can even see his face, and I can see him.
While you're thinking of that, Jim Palmer is an Oriole broadcaster today.
Yes, he is.
So he's been with them quite a while. Yeah.
Was it a cereal, Jack?
No, it was an underwear commercial.
Oh yes, when he's wearing yes. I remember.
Yeah, so he would be modeling. Yeah.
Yes, he's modeled underwear. Yes, he was. So anyway, one of the greatest pitchers of all time, right? As James said, 3 different decades. He's longevity, 2 times AL ERA winner, 4-time Golden Glove. Great. A lot of people don't realize Jim Palmer was a pretty good fielding first pitcher. He really was.
I got to tell you something a little funny too with Earl Weaver. Okay, a couple of my wife's relatives, we met up with them in Florida. We were having lunch. And one of them is saying, the man there, he was a baseball fan. He would tell me in the past he'd see Earl Weaver and his wife in the supermarket. And he would try to talk a little baseball with Earl Weaver. And Earl Weaver was always accommodating. He would talk with them. He wanted to bump up into him. Earl Weaver at the supermarket, ask him questions. Weaver would respond. But Weaver's wife wasn't too pleased, so Weaver would have to go, which I don't blame his wife. You're out shopping at a public supermarket, and, someone's talking baseball with you and holding up your shopping. So no criticism of Weaver's wife.
I think Earl Weaver and Billy Martin were probably the 2 most fun managers to watch during a game because they would definitely flip out on the umpires. Earl Weaver would turn his hat around, this little short guy, and he would go after this big guy.
You don't see that now.
It was hilarious.
Because the replays, you don't see as much arguing. Last night in the Met game, there was a low pitch to the Met batter when they had 2 guys on base. I forgot who it was, maybe Vientos. So he's starting to run to first base because it's obvious it's ball 4 on a full count. And as he's running to first base, it's called strike 3. The batter goes crazy, slams his helmet. The manager runs out, starts arguing. He gets ejected. He shouldn't have gotten ejected. The game meant so much to the Mets, and it was a bad call on top of it that set it all off. But we used to have a lot of fun with Earl Weaver arguing, with umpires. You don't see that anymore.
Also, let me mention that Baltimore did get to another World Series against the Pirates again in '79. And they one was a bit of a meltdown because they led 3-1. So
that's where
was a big meltdown. And they had
that's where I get Willie Stargell. That's where I got Willie Stargell from, Jack.
That's why, James, when you talk about those Oriole teams from 69 to 79, and if you use the term overachiever, underachiever, I hate to say it, they underachieved just a little bit because in that 11-year span, they won 1 World Series.
True.
And when you look at some of their great players, you kind of wanted more. But this is what happens in baseball. Those great Met teams, Strawberry, Hernandez, Carter, Gooden, they only won one world championship. The great Brooklyn Dodger teams, Jackie Robinson, Duke Snyder, Gil Hodges, only one world championship.
True. It's
You know,
true.
when you think of
Very
it,
true.
but somehow
Very
you
true.
feel they were better than those teams.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to upset in baseball, I think, maybe than any other sport. So with that, folks, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the show. Have a